All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing A Higher Call by Adam Makos and Larry Alexander, a World War II nonfiction book about a B-17 bomber and a German Messerschmitt 109 airplane that met over the airspace of Germany. An incident happened between those two aircraft that was very rare. I don't even know how to describe it. Let's just, I'll show you. A B-17 bomber looks like this thing I've got in my hand. Well, this is a replica of a B-17 bomber. And then a German Messerschmitt 109 looks like this. And these two planes, after this bombing run, this plane, which was piloted by Charlie Brown, was on a bombing run above Germany with hundreds of other aircraft, got orphaned in the sky. It was all shot up. It was going to crash. And then this lone fighter pilot in a Messerschmitt, they came across each other in the airspace above Germany. Something happened between these two planes. I won't talk about that. I'm just setting up the plot of the book and the real events that happened. Something happened over the German airspace, which was very rare, very exciting, heart-pounding, heart palpitant. I mean, when I was reading it, I was just like, first of all, I was sweating. It was tense, and it left me in tears, what happened between these two airplanes over the airspaces of Germany. And we'll get into that. I won't tell you what happened because that's part of the book. You'll have to read the book to find that out. But we will talk about some of the characters in the book. And let's talk about the book itself, how it's so well designed it is. I mean, it's got this great cover by an artist named Nicholas Trudgian, I believe. And then there's also a lot of different photographs and other paintings inside here, of the different places and events and different types of aircraft that we're going to read about. And then it starts out, the whole book starts out with the introduction by Adam Makos, how he, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I'm probably going to get most of the names mispronounced in this book. But anyway, Adam Makos, he's like, why did I write this book? He's like, well, when I was a teenager, my French club booked a trip to France, to Paris, France, and I signed up for that trip, but then at the last minute, my parents, they bought us a trip to Disney World, and I thought, well, the Disney World trip sounds funner, so I'm not going to go on the French club trip to Paris. I'm going to go with my parents to Disney World. Well, what happened was his classmates and his teacher got aboard TWA Flight 800, and that was the flight that was, they believe, a terrorist attack took it down over the skies of Long Island, New York. And so his whole class and his teacher died in that flight, a flight that he was supposed to be on. And that really left an impact on his. In fact, if you want to read about TWA Flight 800, it is the basis for the novel Night Flight by Nelson DeMille. He talks all about that and the investigation of how that all happened. And it's book number 3 in Nelson DeMille's John Corey investigative series. Very good book if you want to read about that. But anyway, Adam Makos was supposed to be on that flight. He wasn't, but he got very interested in aviation. And then eventually, as he grew up, he became a writer and met the two pilots, the pilot of the Messerschmitt and the pilot of the B-17, that are part of this story. Now, as the story starts, we meet Franz Stigler after the war. The very first part of the book is Franz Stigler. The war is over. It's 1946. He's in Straubing, Germany, which I Googled. Every town that's mentioned in this book, I actually Googled it and looked at it to see where we were geographically. But even the parts of Sicily and Africa that are mentioned in here. But anyway, Straubing, Germany is where the book starts out. The war is over. The incidents in this book all have taken place already. We're meeting Franz Stigler, this German ace, decorated fighter pilot, as he's trying to make his way through Germany to find a job, to find work, to find respect, just to find a sense of purpose in life in war-torn Germany. And the authors of this book do a great job of describing how awful it is after a war in a place like Germany. And it's because it was it was rough. In fact, if you want to read a great book about what Germany was like after World War II, just pick up Savage Continent by Keith Lowe. It shows you how Europe was just torn apart by this war and how savage of a place it was for quite a while after the war. This is a great book. It is an eye-opening book about what the effects of war have on people and landscapes. But anyway, so Franz Stigler, we meet him. He's going through this. And then we jump back in time to when Franz Stigler was a kid and how he kind of grows up. And one of the things that I like about that is we get to meet Franz Stigler first. Because remember, Franz Stigler was the German ace fighter pilot of the Messerschmitt. And our other character, Charlie Brown, was the pilot of the B-17. And I like the fact that we get to meet the German character first, the German man first, because we get to see why he's in the war, why he's a pilot, why he's fighting in a war he doesn't really believe in and asked to do things that he doesn't really want to do. Because Franz Stigler grew up in just kind of like a idyllic Bavarian town. I think it was called Armstead or something. What was it called? I can't remember. But I looked that one up too. But he grew up in Amberg, Germany. That was it. He flew gliders with his brother and his father. This was like around the World War I time, and they would fly these gliders and crash them, and they just learned to fly. And but he kind of got recruited into. His dream was to be a pilot, and he became a pilot. He was a civilian pilot, and then the German army, the SS, the Nazis, they said, and Franz Stigler makes a point of saying, I was never a Nazi. I didn't vote for Hitler. I didn't want anything to do with this. I was just a pilot. I wanted to make a living, and then they recruited me into the Air Force, and they told me, you're going to train young men how to be fighter pilots and how to fly bombers and all this stuff. So he became a trainer for people that were going to go out to war. And then he was so good at it. He was so elite at what he did that they said, well, now you're going to be a fighter pilot too, which he did. He became one. He didn't really want to do it. He kind of resisted it. But then he's like, well, I didn't want to face the firing squad. It was either be a fighter pilot or face the firing squad. So I went and became a fighter pilot. And he was very, very, very good at his job. He was an ace fighter pilot. I mean, on page 11 of this book, it talks about how he was first sent down to Sicily. He was in Africa. He was stationed in a lot of places before the Allies started bombing Germany. But this is one of the things that was interesting is he says, when other men walked in the war, France flew at 400 miles per hour. France had led 3 squadrons of pilots, about 40 men, against formations of 1,000 American bombers that stretched 100 miles. In 3 years, France had entered combat 487 times and had been wounded twice, burned once, and somehow always came out alive, which is like rare because most of these guys died. Most of these German pilots died. In fact, they say in this book, they give a statistic that there were 28,000 German fighter planes and fighter pilots in the war, of which only 1,200 survived the war. That's a dangerous job. And France did it, and he was an ace pilot. He shot down a lot of airplanes. He, in his little Messerschmitt, he shot down a lot of these planes to the point where he was one of the most decorated fighter pilots Germany had ever had. And so when we get to the crux of the story, when it's just this guy against this guy, and this guy's an ace pilot, and these guys and this are all rookies. This is the first mission they've been on, and they meet this guy up in the skies above Germany. Oh my God, my heart was pounding. So then the second part of the book, of course, I like the fact that we started the book learning about France, the German fighter pilot, because of course we're going to think that he's the villain, right? Because he's part of the Nazi regime. But we get to see him as a person who had dreams and goals and family and love life and everything, and was forced into war that he didn't want to fight, and into a job that they said, you do it or we'll kill you. And then he ended up being so good at the job that it just, it with his head as he got older and older, because he grew to be an old man. In fact, he left Germany after the war, and moved to Vancouver, Canada. But anyway, that's we're going to get into that a little bit later. But let's talk about Charlie Brown and his crew of the because then we meet them and we get to see who all the 10 crew members of this plane. Charlie Brown was a 20-year-old kid, pretended to be 25 years old so he could fly the plane, because he's like, they're not going to let me fly this plane, because he knew how to fly. And nobody's going to respect me as the captain of this plane if I'm just 20. So he's just told everybody he was 25. And he ended up the captain of this plane. Their very first bombing mission over Germany, they're with hundreds of other planes going in. And these guys get shot up. In their very first mission, this plane just gets shot to hell. The flak hits them. The Messerschmitts, there's thousands of these things swarming around like bees and just shooting them. And the plane that they lose one of the wings. All of it's shot up. Everybody inside of it's taken wounds and they're shot up. And one of them's dead, one of them's missing a leg. There's just so much carnage in here. And Charlie Brown is the only one lucid enough. And in fact, at one point, I'm not even going to get into what the battle was like. But let's just say that this plane was shot up so bad, and so many of the planes around them had just been blown out of the sky and crashed into the ground. But the main fleet headed back. They did their bombing run, and they headed back to England, and this was the lone straggler. And it was just going so slow because it was so shot up. And it was at 39,000 feet when it started, and it was just slowly falling. And it was the only plane left in the sky. And then Franz Stigler was the only German plane left to follow this with the assignment of, you go kill these guys. You go in and kill these guys. And I'll tell you, what happens next was pulse pounding, heart-rending, heart-wrenching, and left me teary-eyed as I watched, as I just read about this, what happened. I'm not going to say what happened, but I will say that we jump 40 years later, and this pilot, Franz Stigler, and this pilot, Charlie Brown, haven't stopped thinking about each other and the events that took place in the airspace above Germany when this plane was a sitting duck and this ace fighter pilot was tasked with just killing them. And everybody lived. And they thought about each other for 40 years afterwards. And when they finally found out who each other was, because they, of course they didn't, they know what happened in the sky. And then they were just like, I wonder if, because Charlie Brown, the captain of the B-17, was like, I wonder whatever happened to that German pilot that I had that interaction with in the skies over Germany. I wonder whatever happened to him. I wonder if he survived. And then the German pilot, Franz Stigler, was like, those guys in that B-17, I wonder whatever happened to them. And when it's the touching moment is when, and I get emotional because I mean, I've been to Germany, I've been to Dachau prison camp, I've seen so many World War II history sites. And I mean, it's one of my passions is to go visit these places where these men fought. And I do have compassion for all sides. The French, the Belgians, the Russians, the Germans, the Americans, the English, the Japanese, everybody involved in the war. I know that they're just regular folks that are, you know, now there was evil people, but let's face it, most of the people just wanted to live their lives, like Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler. And then the touching part of this book is when they slowly start to discover that the other one might be alive, or that they might be alive. And they finally connect. And their letters back and forth, you can read them in the book. They're so fascinating as they try to figure out, is this really the person that I met in the skies above Germany? And they figure it out, and they realize it's real, and then they meet. And then it's one of those things where we get to see Franz Stigler and these men, these 10 men, 9 of which that survived the war. Well, some of them, anyway, I won't get into that. But the ones that survived the war, they get to meet this German fighter pilot that they met They finally got to meet, and the German fighter pilot got to see the families of these men that had lived through the war. And those men got to see the family that Franz Stigler had. And it was just like, it's touching. I mean, it's just like one of those things where you're like, these were mortal enemies that lived through the war, that had an interaction high above, in the airs of Germany, above Germany. They had an interaction that was very rare and unique, and I just won't get into what happened, but because you're gonna have to read the book or watch all the YouTube videos that are about this, because there's a shit fucking ton of them, where you can watch the interviews of these guys. Anyway, but I was left in awe of just these people and what they did, and how they just, none of them wanted to be in this situation. Let's just say that. None of them did. And not a single one of them wanted to be where they were at 39,000 feet up above Germany. And then as they slowly, I mean, I just won't even get into it. Anyway, God, this book was fucking great. You know, I need to start reading, like I said, a couple weeks ago, I said I need to start reading more nonfiction and reviewing it and this is the reason why. These are the type of books about real people and real situations that if you were to put it in a novel, people wouldn't believe it. They'd be like, no, that's not believable. But it really happened. It really happened in the war. And I was just left in awe. I was teary-eyed. I was proud to be an American, you know, I mean, and 10 out of 10. Just one of the most fascinating reads I've read in a long time. A Higher Call